Trump keeps drifting closer and closer. That's what I said a couple of weeks ago to Nazism. He is now fully immersed in it. There is no doubt, no question. Listen to the things he's saying when he gives his Nuremberg-style rallies. And yesterday, Monday, he suggested that migrants who are in the United States are corrupt and evil because, quote, it's in their genes. Genes, not blue jeans. It's in their genes. And he added, there are a lot of bad genes in our country right now. This is like eugenics that became very popular in this country in the early part of the 20th century. And eugenics was a horrible, horrible principle that the way you change the general population and make it wonderful and beautiful and good and very, very white, you get rid of the people. You sterilize the people who happen to be born. You don't kill them, but you sterilize them so they can't have any offspring. And slowly but surely, within 5-10 generations, you will have eliminated the so-called bad genetics. And, of course, Hitler's whole philosophy of destroying the Jews was based on American eugenics. We were the fount from which this poison spewed that Adolf Hitler used as his means. He came up with the method, but as his reasoning for destroying the Jewish population of Europe. It came from here. You are aware of that, right? Let me pause for a sip of River Moon. Oh, love that coffee. Anyway, what Trump said yesterday about some bad genes in this country, this is the latest example of this orange bastard saying that immigrants are changing the hereditary makeup of the U.S. I mean, this is so out of the Hitler anti-Semitic playbook, it might as well be word for word, only in English instead of German. And last year, this orange Nazi evoked language once used by Hitler to argue that immigrants, you remember this, that immigrants entering the United States are, quote, poisoning the blood of our country, end quote. I mean, that is precisely a quote from the most murderous piece of demonic shit in the history of the history of the world, Adolf Hitler. I know you're going to argue with me about that one, right? Anyway, Trump made these comments yesterday in a radio interview with this silly little fuck named Hugh Hewitt. I mean, talk about Hugh Hewitt. It was Hugh Hewitt and John Kasich who were doing a little mutual circle jerk one time on the Fox sewer when I was at Air America. And I got a call from Fox saying, they wanted to have me on their little toy program, I guess to show the Fox viewers what how fucked up a liberal was. So I said, sure, I'll go on your program. So I went on the program. And it was what they call a 3-shot. All three of us were on the screen. And Hugh and Kasich were talking back and forth about these fucked up liberals. And then they brought me into the conversation. And, I had this brief thought, what the hell am I doing here? But finally, one of them said something, and I forget which, I think it was Hugh Hewitt who said it, that really pissed me off. And I thought, this is ridiculous. Why sit here and dignify these two with my presence? Right. Well, so I stood up and took my mic off, and immediately, before I even got fully stood up, the control back in New York in the Fox sewer had cut my mic for fear I was going to say something, fuck you people, and walk out. I was actually in the Fox studio here in Atlanta. But that was my own experience with Hugh Hewitt. Well, John Kasich, too. But and Kasich, to me, he's a real snake. He is very anti-Trump, but, I'm about as impressed with that as I am impressed with, chunky peanut butter. Don't try to figure that out. But Hugh Hewitt, who is just a talentless prick, he has this radio show, I guess, and he was interviewing the Orange Bastard. And Trump was criticizing Harris when he pivoted to immigration, and he cited statistics that the Department of Homeland Security says include cases from his administration. But this is what he said, quote, Trump, how about allowing people to come through an open border, 13,000 of which were murderers? Many of them murdered far more than one person, and they're now happily living in the United States. You know how a murderer, I believe this, it's in their genes. And we got a lot of bad genes in our country right now. Then you had 425,000 people come to our country that shouldn't be here, that are criminals with these bad genes. End quote. Now, if Biden would have said anything remotely resembling that, every editorial writer in the United States, as they did, would start screeching and screaming and wetting their pants about how Biden had finally floated into dementia and we had to have somebody to take his place. But when Trump says it, there are a few rumbles in the New York Times, the Washington Post, about Trump's encroaching dementia and how fucked up this man really is, mentally, psychologically, emotionally. But for the most part, it's ignored. It's avoided. Every time Trump opens his mouth and stuffs his foot in even further. Now, a campaign spokesperson for the Orange Vomit, the National Press Secretary, this Caroline Leavitt, oh, you poor thing, you. She said in a statement after that, quote, he was clearly referring to murderers, not migrants. Right. Even though he uses the term migrant more than he uses the name of his own wife. I mean, he calls them migrants. They're genetically predisposed to murder and mayhem. But Caroline Leavitt said he was referring to murderers, not migrants. It's pretty disgusting. The media is always so quick to defend murderers, rapists, and illegal criminals if it means writing a bad headline about President Trump. End quote. See, this is what I'm talking about. I would imagine that Caroline had a mom and dad. Well, of course she had a mom and dad. But I mean, she was probably raised in a nice middle-class white family, maybe in Illinois or Ohio or Wisconsin. Went to elementary school, maybe was even in the Girl Scouts, then went on to high school, possibly was a cheerleader. And what happened to her? How did she go from, I'm making this shit up, of course, I don't know what her upbringing was. Her parents might have been druggies who are now in prison. I don't know. But let's assume, because so many people have followed this path, they start out in this country as being normal people, and then they come into contact with this vortex of lies and deceit and poison and Christian madness that is Donald Trump, and they get sucked in. Just like this Stephen Chung, who has lost his fucking mind. But all of these people who wind up associated with Trump, have you noticed? Surely you have. They say crazy shit, like this woman who says the media is always quick to defend murderers, rapists, and illegal criminals. No, the media is not always quick or slow or at all. God. So the ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, released immigration enforcement data to a Republican, Representative Tony Gonzalez, last month about the people under ICE's supervision, including those not in ICE custody. And that included 13,000 people who were found guilty of homicide and 400,000 who are convicted criminals. But those numbers, those numbers cover decades, 40 or 50 years, including the Trump years. And those who are not in ICE custody are probably detained by state or local law enforcement agencies. That's according to the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees ICE. But little old Carolyn Leavitt, Trump's national press secretary, says, hey, it's disgusting the way he's quick to defend murderers and rapists. Honey, a lot of them came from your Lord and Master Christ God Jesus Donald Trump's administration. And besides that, Caroline, you poor ignorant little girl, it spans decades. You leave that part out, don't you? Yeah, of course you do. And during her daily briefing with reporters yesterday, the White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, was asked about this comment about bad genes that came out of Trump's pie hole. And Jean-Pierre said, quote, that type of language, it's hateful, it's disgusting, it's inappropriate, it has no place in our country, end quote. Well, yeah, that's true. But with all due respect, Ms. Jean-Pierre, and I'm sure you've noticed this, it's all over this country. So to say it has no place in this country, well, the orange bastard has carved out a huge place for that kind of garbage, racist, Nazi talk. And probably 40 or 50 million Americans are going to vote for this Nazi fucker on November 5th. So, again, with all due respect, Ms. Jean-Pierre, that kind of language has found a place in this country. Now, what to do about that is the big problem.
Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. You know, the Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.